unless you're just amazingly still. And welcome to everyone else. Susan is our angel today, although you're all angels for having shown up. And we have a double portion this week. And we're going to begin with our bracha for Torah study, and Susan's going to help us with that.
Yeah, let me find that. Everything is in a different place, so it may take a second in between.
Okay.
There we go.
Not a problem.
And I turned on the live transcription. If you don't want to see it, you can select to not see it.
Huh. So, I know it will be cacophonous, but I really like the idea of our voices being here. So let's read it together. But before we do, let's center ourselves and arrive. We've had a very interesting range of days, I'm sure. We could just spend the whole hour sharing what we did today, and that would be fun too. But let's arrive here for our very precious hour of Torah study. And then unmute yourselves, and we'll read this blessing together, first in Hebrew and then in English. Baruch
atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Blessed
are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah.
So thank you, Susan. And I realized that a couple of times we've run into these double portions. And as you all know, there are 52 weeks in the year as we count them. And there are 54 parshiot or portions. So there would have to be a doubling up, but it turns out that it's a little different in the counting. This is my great pleasure of having the opportunity to study with you, because I keep learning new things myself. So I wasn't sure why this happened and how did they figure it out and when were the portions doubled. And so I actually went, where do we all go to really learn the truth? To Wikipedia. And the good news about Wikipedia, I mean, of course, we don't take it as Torah Sinai, but it is a kind of Torah, because since it's open to everyone, people can correct the mistakes. And I'd be interested to hear from you, particularly those of you who are scholars and serious students and teachers, how you feel about your students looking stuff up on Wikipedia. But I wanted to share with you a chart I found on Wikipedia, and I thought it was pretty good. So Susan's going to bring that up. So this is the table of weekly readings, Susan, and I modified it a little bit so that we could see each book of the Torah separately. So each book is on a separate page. So if you would scroll up, Susan, to the first page, there we go. And it got cut off, and I don't know why, but there's that funny thing in it. But so you can see, and could you move it up a little bit, Susan, to see if we can get the whole Bereshit in there? Okay, stop. Bring it down a tiny bit. Great. Okay. So at the top of the page, it says, in this table, a portion may be combined with the following portion to compensate for the changing number of weeks in the lunar solar year. We could spend a lot of wonderful time talking about the fact that we have a lunar solar year. Here they write lunar solar, that we are both counting time by the sun and the moon. Whereas, well, how do we count it in the way we count our days? Who knows?
Is it lunar?
I think it is lunar, because, and we can take a look at where the moon is at any given time, which we can also do for the Jewish calendar. So the moon is always full, for instance, at Pesach. And we could talk about that. And when is it darkest, when is it lightest? But it's also correlated, and there are people who are much more familiar with this than I am, with the cycles of the sun, because the sun, of course, is our day. And that's also the fun part of living at the very edge of a time zone. So anyway, back to this. So we see here, we have 5 books of the Torah, and they were divided by the Masoretes many centuries ago into these different parshiot, into these different portions. And the decision then of which ones to combine, I stopped myself in the middle of reading the sentence that explained it, to compensate for the changing number of weeks. The portions that can be combined are marked with an asterisk. So what we're seeing is that no portions in Bereshit are ever combined, which is interesting, because when we think about what the content of each of the books is, Bereshit, Genesis, has many stories. These are all the kind of foundational stories of the Jewish people. And here you have the Parsha name. In the blue is the name in Hebrew, next to, but in transliteration, next to the Hebrew. And then there's an English equivalent, and then it gives the actual portion. What are the verses there? And any of us who are on Zoom right now who had a bar bat mitzvah are very familiar with this, because one of those portions was ours. We often say, this is my portion, and there's a sense of, this is my portion forever. But each youngster or adult who has a bar bat mitzvah and reads from the Torah, there is a sense of ownership and an opportunity to dive deeply. What is the message here? And there are certain portions, of course, that are highly sought after. Many people would really love to have the very first portion of Genesis. Many people would love to have the Noah story, because there's so much richness there. I'm not wearing it today, but I often wear a kippah that is from a bat mitzvah on Parashat Noach, and it's got the rainbow sign on. It's a rainbow kippah. So I like that, of course, for multiple reasons. Let's move down to Exodus, Susan. So now we come to Exodus, and we see here, if we're looking at the, looking for asterisks, what do we see?
There's one.
There's one, and where is it?
Via Kel.
Hard to say. Vayakel, yes. So Vayakel is, and as I think I've mentioned that the parshiot are named for one of the very first words in the first sentence of that particular portion. So Vayakel sometimes is read on its own, and sometimes is read with the following portion. So it wouldn't be read with ki tisa, but it would be read with pikudei. So those two are often combined. Let's go down now to our portion. We're now working in Vayikra, in Leviticus, and we see here, well, what do you see?
3.
There's 3. So what that could mean is that we're only reading Leviticus for, let's count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks, as opposed to 10, correct? So there are 10 parshiot in this book, of Vayikra, the middle book. And in some ways, if you think of an accordion, it's the one that's most flexible, I think. And so here we are twice. Well, we've had our meetings when we've had double portions. And tonight we're going to be doing the last two portions of the book of Leviticus, Bahar and Bechukotai. So we're reading all of chapter 25 and all of chapter 26 and into chapter 27. I'm not sure. Well, no, and we're finishing the book of Vayikra. That's it. So let's look then at the next book, which is Bamidbar. Susan's going to take us down there, which is one of the ones that has a very, well, there are many that have different names in Hebrew and English, but Bamidbar really means in the desert. And it's translated as numbers because there's a lot of counting in the very first couple of chapters. So here again, how many do we see that can be combined?
You guys can unmute and speak if you want.
Yes, you can.
Let me make sure. Can everybody unmute themselves?
Yes.
Yeah, it looks like you can.
Two?
Okay. Yeah, so there's two. So Hukat is often combined with Balak, and Matot is often combined with Maseh. And now we'll move to the last book. And what do you see here? One. So in a way, I didn't spread all five of them out and look, but the fact that Vayikra, the middle book, had the most. So unlike Genesis, our first book, we do have one that can be combined in Devarim, in Deuteronomy. And that is Nitzavim with Vayelech. And Nitzavim is many of you know the very beginning of Nitzavim because we read it at Rosh Hashanah. Atem Nitzavim hayom kulchem lifnei Adonai Elohechem. So it's, you are standing here today. Nitzavim means standing. We are all standing there that day before God, but that in some way is really the whole Torah. So I just wanted to play with this a little. Again, this is not an area of deep expertise for me, but I thought it would be just fun to see why some are doubled. And the other reason is, why do we not just read one a week? Because when we have a chag of some kind, we push the portion away and we read the particular portion for the holiday. So for Passover, we always have a special reading. You've probably noticed this, those of you who go on a regular basis or who follow along. Certainly for the high holidays, we're pushing away, we're not reading whatever would have come. And of course, that's also later in the year. So we're finishing up always at Simchat Torah. And so we would have to oh my gosh, we've got to get to Simchat Torah. So we've got to push them together, but each synagogue does not make that decision. Yeah, Susan.
So you say we push it away when there's a holiday. Is that every time there's a holiday, whichever Friday is near it, or only if it falls on Shabbat?
Oh, what a good question. There are particular, you would actually be able to see this, those of you who have a book of some kind. It may be in your book, but it may not. I guess I'm realizing it's not in the Torah, a women's commentary, but in other Torahs, you would be able to see it. I'm wondering what I can quickly grab in this room. I have books in too many rooms, but I know that other Torah commentaries that I don't have at hand right now list the special Torah portions and the Haftorah portions also, so that I would actually have to check, Susan, too. I'm pretty sure that it doesn't have to be exactly on the day. It's the Shabbat during Pesach. So even if even if Seder was on Wednesday, or the Shabbat during Shavuot.
What about holidays that are shorter that may not include a Shabbat?
All right, Hanukkah, well, that does
include
it's
Shabbat.
longer. So Tu B'Shvat won't have its own. Tisha B'Av, there are special readings, but it wouldn't change the calendar. This is such a good question. The high holidays for sure would be have their own Torah readings.
But what if they don't fall on Shabbat?
Oh, the high holidays? Then
Yeah.
it would be
You'd still read the regular Torah portion for the Shabbat, or no?
no, you would read the special Torah portion. So Judah has a question. And I'm very happy to be challenged on this because I'm learning along with you on this particular thing. I tried to read as much as I could in preparation, but I didn't get all the answers I needed. Judah.
So actually I have the JPS Tanakh in front of me, and in the back it a whole list of Sabbath that include the weekly portion plus something else, and then it has the one specifically for the days of awe, and then all the festivals, and then weekday occasions like for Purim or stuff like that.
Great, thank you. I knew that it was in other books. So
Purim is on a Tuesday. What portion do you read on Friday? The regular one or the Purim one?
All right, Judah's going to look in the book and see what it says.
It says you would read Exodus 17:8 through 16.
On Purim or on the nearest Shabbat?
On Purim.
Now I'm going to have to check this one to see what
2 weeks.
What do you read on Shabbat? I'm actually okay, right? But
you also read the Book of Esther.
Yes, we read the Book of Esther on Purim. I'm kind of surprised about the other thing.
Yeah.
But I'm going to look this up. This is such a good question, and I'm going to learn with you. So thank you for putting up with my continuing rabbinic education, or my
I'm just glad you have resources you can come back and tell us. And
all right. Well, I definitely do. So I would like to look at our portion tonight. Well, at our two portions, we couldn't look at everything, and they're not the easiest portions. So I think, Susan, I did send you the outlines. Yes, thank you. And here they are. So
you want both together like this?
That's perfect. That's great. So the one on the left, where it says introduction, additional teachings from Sinai. This is for the first portion, Bahar. If we had the whole page, you would see the word Bahar at the top of the page. And I'm sorry, these are a little less clear than we would like them to be, but you can see the focus of this portion, which is not terribly long. That's another thing that the wise rabbis kept in mind when they were talking about combining, was to put shorter portions together. And we could go through and see the exact, numbers of pages and stuff like that. So here, it's laws regarding the land's Sabbath, which is actually what we're going to look at. Then there is almost a complete chapter 25, other than the 5 lines we're going to look at, about the 50th year Jubilee, the idea of laws and regulations that are changed or put on rest for the 50th year. And 50 is 7 times 7 plus 1. Ironically or interestingly, that's the same way we are counting the Omer, 7 times 7. And then this conclusion, God's ownership of the Israelites is a basis for the Jubilee laws. Part of what we are learning in the entire book of Leviticus is the development of God's relationship with the people. And that here, after coming out of slavery, we are now subject to God's laws. And God in the Torah will take care of us with greater magnanimity, if that's the right word, with more magnanimous love and care than any human king could. Of course, there's another side to that, that misbehavior on our part can lead us into trouble. And we see that in the next portion in Bechukotai, the final one in the book of Leviticus, where there are blessings and for obedience and curses for disobedience. And under the heading of ensuring obedience to God. And as you see, it's also that this particular outline calls this the epilogue to the entire book of Leviticus. And then they call this an appendix. Not every Torah that I've ever looked at, this is the first one I've ever used that has outlines for the student, the reader, the person who's studying. But here, the editors of the Torah and Women's Commentary, that's where these pages were Xeroxed from, looks at the conclusion of the book of Leviticus as an appendix. And that what the sanctuary, the funding of the sanctuary, the gifts to the sanctuary, and the dues for the sanctuary, that actually may sound familiar to any of you who have been on the board of any synagogue, particularly the one that is sponsoring us today. So I just wanted us to take a look at that. And then what we're going to do is turn to the very beginning of Bahar, and Susan's going to help us do that. To go to, oh, you are awesome. So here we are, Leviticus 25. And she's doing this from Sefaria, which I think we've talked about quite a bit. It is such a wonderful resource for those of us who want to study Torah or any other aspect of Jewish tradition. So I would love a reader. And Susan, you may help me. I can't both see the everybody and see the text at the same time. So either raise your hand or just start to read. We have such a lovely small group here. Okay, Fred, go for it.
The Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I assign to you, the land shall observe a Sabbath of the Lord. Okay, thanks. 6 years you may sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in the yield. But in the 7th year, the land shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, a Sabbath of the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. Continue still?
Yes, just through 7.
Okay. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest or gather the grapes of your untrimmed vines. It shall be a year of complete rest for the land. But you may eat whatever the land during its Sabbath will produce. You, your male and female slaves, the hired and bound laborers who live with you, and your cattle and the beasts in your land may eat all its yield.
Okay. So Susan, if you could let us see as much of this as possible.
Oh.
Yeah, don't take it off yet, because I would love to have, and those of you who have a book, of course, go to your book, chapter 25, verses 1 through 7. So I would love someone to share what they have gained from this.
I don't know if this is good, but we see more.
Okay, if that's the best we can do, that's fine. I'd love some responses. This may be very familiar. This may be something very new for you. Any responses? What's happening here?
Well, I'll respond. God is commanding that we let the land rest every 7 years, and agriculturally, that's a really wise thing to do.
Would you like to say more?
Well, I come from a farming background, so every so often you need to let the land lay fallow, they call it, and it allows the nutrients in the ground to kind of regenerate and pulls things up from deeper in the soil, and the microorganisms get a chance to reestablish themselves in the ground. So that's what happens.
So this is a pretty impressive ancient understanding of that. Would you say?
I would agree.
So anyone else from a farming background, or simply insights into what Fred read? Fred.
It's interesting, but I recall Rabbi Eli doing a drosh about this. And I think, is it called smicha? Is that the term?
Well, Shemitah, that's
Shemitah.
the question. Is it called, should it be called Shemitah?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's that. And then also the thing that's, I'm always into is the word gematria or gematria?
Uh-huh. Gematria.
Gematria. The 7, the idea of like the 7 days, it seems like 7 years. It seems like that magical number keeps happening. So 7 years, you take a break, 7 days, like some symbolism with the number 7 keeps floating through the Torah.
Yes.
Something that I notice.
So I've got, there are lots of things. It's a prime number. We all live in a 7-day cycle of the week. So what about the idea of the land getting a Shabbat? And I'd like you also to look here at and you can see it in translation. Where is the word Shabbat? Where does the word Shabbat appear in these 7 verses? And maybe count them, either in Hebrew or English, because it's translated. And someone could just read it and say in verse X, the word, just to let us all play with it here. Maybe Fred, you want to read it again and then just kind of underscore the word Shabbat or Sabbath?
Okay, I can do that.
Okay.
You want me to read through it, and then when I get to that word, okay.
Yeah.
The Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I assign to you, the land shall observe a Shabbat of the Lord. 6 years you may sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in the yield. But in the 7th year, the land shall have a Shabbat of complete rest, a Shabbat of the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. Oh, sorry. Okay, good. Okay. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest or gather the grapes of your untrimmed vines. It shall be a year of complete rest for the land. But you may eat whatever the land during its Shabbat will produce. You, your male and female slaves, the hired and bound laborers who live with you, and your cattle and the beasts in your land may eat all its yield.
Okay, thank you. So here the word kept coming back. And this is not the first time we've encountered the word or the concept of Shabbat, but it is the first time that we've encountered it for non-humans. It's always been about human behavior. And so what I'd like to do is now contrast this with a previous articulation of Shemitah, and Susan is going to take us to the book of Exodus, chapter 23, verses 10 to 11. You are so awesome. Okay, so I'd love another reader. Eve, could you read for us in the English? Verses 10 and 11?
6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its yield. But in the 7th you shall let it rest and lie fallow. Let the needy among your people eat of it, and what they leave, let the wild beasts eat. You shall do the same with your vineyards and your olive groves.
Okay, so Exodus comes before Leviticus. We had read this, but you see what I'd love to hear your comments on the contrast between these two texts. And actually, Susan, we can put this one aside and just let us see each other. Any thoughts?
In Leviticus, does it say anything about setting something aside for the needy? Doesn't it just say you can eat that?
Yes, that's right. Good observation. What else do you notice?
Exodus 22.
Well, Exodus mentions wild beasts. I don't remember them in Leviticus.
Okay, there weren't any, I don't think. It did say your cattle and the beasts in your land may eat all your yield. But these were wild beasts.
Exodus doesn't
yeah.
mention servants
Good.
or slaves.
Yes. Yes.
I don't remember Leviticus or Exodus doesn't talk about you getting to eat.
Yes, that's right. So that's exactly right. So they're two very different, they're different texts that you could say, well, it's just about having a sabbatical year for the land. But I would suggest, and this is also with thanks to some work done by Rabbi Avital Hochstein, she brings forth the contrast that the Exodus text is very much about your land. You shall sow your land and gather in its yield. And in the 7th year, you shall go and abandon it. And the word abandon is the word Shemitah here. You shall let it rest. You shall leave it alone. The word Shabbat is not mentioned in the Exodus text. Mm-hmm. And rather, she helps point out, and now I'm sharing her wisdom with you, that the Leviticus text, the longer text, the text that we're looking at tonight, is for all the people, not just and for all the land, because it begins with, speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I assign to you, the land shall observe a Sabbath. So the previous one seems to be about individual portions of land. My house at, my land at 1815 on my street, that's just mine. But the entire Israelite people, are entering into the land. And then we're going to have a corporate responsibility for the land that we are about to enter. Not individuals as we might have seen ourselves before Egypt. But this sense of this whole question of ownership is also very challenging because, of course, at the end of the day, who owns the land? God. So even though I may have a deed to the property that my house is on, in ancient Israel and in truth in all of our lives, we can't own the land, just like we can't own another human being. And we are simply temporary tenants. And if we had understood that better, we would have a much more peaceful history in these United States. But the early visionaries, who I think were really deeply committed to a more spiritual, creating a more spiritual union. You know, capitalism undercuts some of the best faith, and faith of or a spiritual direction that we might have. So, so this idea that, and in the Exodus text, neither God nor the word Shabbat are mentioned. In just those 2 lines that we read, it just says, 6 years shall you sow your land and gather in its yield, and the 7th you shall abandon it. And the important part about let the needy come and eat, we have that in the book of Ruth, which we will read at Shavuot in a few weeks. The whole idea of letting the corners of the field, that we don't collect them, we don't reap them, that, and the idea also that is really woven through the entire Torah, that there will always be needy among us. Other thoughts from taking a look at these texts? And I mean, you know, here it's hard for us. I mean, I think all of us are city dwellers. And the whole idea of, I mean, we may be fortunate to own a plot of land or a house, but, you know, I think that David's background of really growing up on a farm, I mean, there's a real different sense of what the land yields. And the idea also of that having the land mirror human behavior and helping us to better understand what Shabbat can really mean. And not just, oh my, you know, if some of you grew up in a traditional home where some people might have been very burdened by preparing food for Shabbat because they weren't going to be doing any food preparation on Shabbat itself. But the idea of here, the land will provide. And that, I mean, of course, if we didn't prepare for Shabbat, we wouldn't have what to eat. But the idea that that everybody needs a day of rest, even the land. So we don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to move this into a conversation really about Shabbat and about our own individual evolutions of observing Shabbos, of observing Shabbat, of making 1/7 of our week different than every other day. That here it's such a strong commandment woven throughout the Torah, so strong that it even applies to the land, and it applies to anyone we may employ, and it applies to our animals. But how do we, as modern Jews who may call ourselves Reform or Reconstructionist or non-halachic, however we define ourselves, who don't take the mitzvot as absolute commandments, but nevertheless, as Mordechai Kaplan said, that halakha has a vote, but not a veto. Hector, your hand is up and I didn't see it. So please, where would you like to jump in?
Just put it up. I have 2 things that I'm thinking about that aren't directly in response to your question, but in the same world. One thing I was thinking about was sort of going back and thinking about Genesis and how people interpret the days and how the days might not be days in the way that we think of them. And I'm thinking about that because of the way it's written here, that you'll do things in a period of 7 weeks of years. And that phrasing, 7 weeks of years. So a week is not necessarily 7 days, it's 7 something. The other thing was that I was listening to a podcast. I think it was Judaism Unbound, and they were talking about how people use the idea of a sabbatical year and the Jubilee to sort of think of their lives in 7-year chunks, where every 7 years they really sit down and think about what they're doing with their lives, what are their goals, what kinds of things do they think they should be focusing on. And I think it was a sort of an extension of Shabbat and taking rest, but also reflecting, and really being serious about time and what you're doing with your life while you're here.
It's a lovely image of taking that time in 7-year increments. And I think, it's particularly apt for us to reflect on that now, because we've had a year of life that challenged us in so many ways, and made many of us think about, okay, well, what am I here for? I can't work the way I did. I can't travel the way I did. I can't even be with friends the way I was used to sharing. And what does this mean for me? How do I want to live the rest of my life? So wonderful. Other thoughts, hands? Yeah, Fred.
It's interesting. I grew up in a household that we went to a conservative synagogue, but my parents really didn't observe Shabbat, and my dad had a business, a jewelry business, that there was no way to survive if he didn't work on Shabbat, which I think saddened him at times. My mom would like Shabbos candles, and we would eat maybe some sort of Jewish food or something like that. But for me, as a Reformed Jew, I think what I've tried to do with Shabbat is, first of all, certainly completely unplug from work. So work email, just close down, told my boss I'm, closed on Shabbat, and completely pull away from that. But I think I don't observe it in a traditional way. I think the other way I observe Shabbat is doing things that I don't do during the week. So for me, going to the art museum and walking around is Shabbat to me. It's taking in the beauty of paintings, or maybe walking through a garden or something like that. So I observe it, I think, in my own special way, but it needs to try to make the day different than other days of the week. I think that's how I go at it.
Thank you. Thank you. Others who would like to share? Muriel.
So I grew up with we did nothing. We didn't observe the religion at all. And it really was as an adult that I started acknowledging my Jewishness. And basically, I started going to services every Friday night. Before Rodef, I checked out Mishkan Shalom. And I still don't, the only thing I do, I'm embarrassed, I acknowledge Shabbat by going to Torah study. I go to services Friday, and then I go to Torah study on Saturday morning. But I'm sitting here feeling a little guilty. I don't really make the day very different from my other days. Because I think even when I was teaching, I was doing schoolwork on Saturday and Sunday.
Well, one of the gifts, I think, of the Jewish calendar is that we always can begin again. And actually, a new month will begin next week. So if we're looking for an opportunity to jumpstart ourselves, in any time in our lives, that's, in some ways it's back to what Hector brought up, All right, so Shabbat is every week. And the truth is, I mean, Judaism teaches us the opportunity of every day, that every day is a new opportunity. And Zeh hayom asa Adonai, nagila v'nismechavo. This is the day that God has made, so that each day is a gift to say, well, I feel guilty, but I don't want to do anything about it. And that's fine. Or, I could do something more. You know, I mean, my road is paved with many good intentions, just as I'm sure everyone else's is. But I always know that I could begin something and try and keep it. And those of you who are in the Introduction to Judaism process or are on a road to consider conversion. Now, I don't know what your teachers have said, but many teachers of the Introduction to Judaism courses will encourage people to try something X number of times. You know, observe, make a special meal for Friday night X number of times, or try and light candles twice during the coming month. Something that will then, is this a habit? Is this a practice that I want to keep? And each of us is going to make our own decisions. That's part of what it means to be a Reformed Jew. And just as Muriel tried one synagogue and it wasn't the right one for her, but then she found RS where she felt very welcomed and it became a synagogue home. Wonderful. But I think, we do have the opportunity to explore different practices and Shabbat is a really obvious one to start with because it comes every week. And to forgive ourselves. Oh, I really meant to have a special meal and here it is 6 o'clock on Friday and I forgot and all I have is a frozen pizza. But you know what? I can still remember it's Shabbos. And I don't have any candles, but maybe there's one candle in the house. Okay, well, I can light that candle. And that's okay, because it's really okay. What is my heart leading me to do? Or I can call a friend. I almost forgot about Shabbos. Do you want to light candles with me on Zoom? Or do you want to sing with me on Zoom? Or in Muriel's case, you go to services every week. That's pretty awesome. That's very regular. That's your practice.
That's my practice.
Yeah, it's a beautiful practice. And I think I really want to honor wherever we are, and that we can always add to. We can, and it's in a way, it's what Hector said, it's taking every 7 years to take a look and to say, is this working for me? Is this serving me? Is this lifting me up? My brother has been doing the same yoga routine for about 20 years. It serves him, that 15-minute yoga with Rodney Yee. Good for him, as long as it's serving. And so that's part of what I want to share my own delight in finding openings and in sharing. I mean, even, I want to run into Fred at the PMA or the Barnes or anywhere else. Here we have that opportunity. So it's time to count the Omer. So Susan has, and I think some of you got the app, which is fun to use. So we are a little ahead of sundown, but I'm, Jewish holidays, for the Jewish day begins in the evening. So last night we counted 37, and there's a tradition of not saying the number until you actually count, so that I can say to us, last night we counted 37. So you know what we're going to count tonight. So here again, there's two parts to this tradition. And the first is the actual blessing, and the second is the counting. And as you know, last week was, well, very tragically, we had this terrible, terrible situation in Israel of a stampede where people died on Lag BaOmer. So folks who came to celebrate ended up losing their lives really horribly at the midpoint of this counting. It's not exactly, it's a little beyond the midpoint. So here we are beyond that, and now moving towards Shavuot. So here is our blessing, and let's say it together in both Hebrew and English. We can unmute so that we can be cacophonous together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat haomer. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who sanctifies us with mitzvot and commands us concerning the counting of the Omer. Hayom Shmona Loshim Yom Shehem Chamisha Shavuot Ushalosh Yamim La'omer. Shlosha. Good. Today is 38 days, which is 5 weeks and 3 days of the Omer. So you've just fulfilled a mitzvah, and I thank you for doing that with me. And I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks, when I'm going to have more information about the Parshiot